This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Kyle Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Another week of NBA action in the books. So many great NBA matchups over the course of this week. All roads leading up to a jam-packed, solid Christmas Day NBA. And man, oh man, so many good things going on right now in the league. I can't wait to roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, 50 grand, NBA aficionado, my brother from another mother, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw, man. Welcome back to the sands, shores, and the asphalt abroad. I heard you were gallivanting across the oceans, man.
Doing my thing a little bit, as always. I appreciate the welcome back. And yeah, we had a good time. Me and the fiance getting out there on the open seas, seeing a couple islands and all that. It was hard though. Didn't have too much Wi-Fi, too much internet access to see what was going on in the NBA. But you know me, man. I found a way to stay in touch and stay plugged. So as always, man, salute to you and all the listeners of all our fans of the NBA Baseline, man. It's gonna be a great show. A couple nice topics on deck. Can't wait to jump right in as always, brother.
Yeah, listen, man. Listen, in all fairness, we do this thing almost year round because the NBA, man, just seems NBA don't sleep, right? But you on a cruise, man. You gallivanting. I wouldn't expect you to be trying to chime in, on the NBA, man. I mean, wifey catches that, man. I mean, seriously, man, you might go overboard, man, and that would be terribly worse because then we'd have to have a search party to try and find my co-host for the show.
She was actually pretty chill about it, and more or less, I didn't even try anything for the first 4 days or so. But day 5, I was like, listen.
Oh, you were catching the itch, right? You were catching the Joneses, right?
Yeah. So luckily, they had ESPN on in the bar, caught a couple games there, pieces of games, I shouldn't say, not full games. But then the sports bar was cold as all hell. So then she didn't want to come with me there. You know how it is, man. Just a little bit here. But she let me slide for a couple minutes here to catch some stuff. And, I had a couple people trying to hit me on the WhatsApp, send me some box scores and things like that too. So I kept up a little bit, but not nearly as in depth as I ordinarily would, bro.
Definitely. So, well, listen, man, welcome back. I'm sure our listeners are much happier that you're back once again and haven't even lost a step, man. We're able to record our show previously, and then now you're back here as we get to talk about some pretty important topics that are taking place right now. One in particular that we're going to touch on in a few moments is the what's going on in Denver. The Denver Nuggets were among one of those teams, Shaw, that we kind of had in the middle. They were in the balance. We weren't sure what the outlook was going to be for this basketball team, but surprisingly, this has been a team that has survived through a rash of injuries and has still managed to be an above 500 basketball team. So we'll dig into a little bit about, what's going on out there. Why are the Denver Nuggets the gold mine in the NBA right now? And then in our topic of the drop, really clever concept by you. I must send you out on the shores a little bit more often if you're going to come up with some pretty interesting topics for a drop like this. We have what we call the good on the bad and the ugly. So our take on good players on just really, really bad teams. So we got a lot to get into. There's some really important news and topics in our coveted Coast to Coast. So once again, sit back, relax, tune in, keep us locked. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. We're live and direct via the Almighty Ballers Network. Basketball 24/7 to listen to. So be sure to check out the Baseline NBA podcast via Almighty Ballers. We're also available on Potable, a new platform that podcasts people are now flocking to as well too. You can also catch us on the 16 Windsor Ring website, one of the premier websites that covers the NBA. And then you can also catch us on Dash Radio. So download any of these platforms. Allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it down.
Time now for the breakdown. Kyle Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And the main topic this week for the breakdown is pointed towards the Denver Nuggets. The Denver Nuggets are somewhat of an anomaly for us here in, that watch and follow things that are happening right now in the NBA. Much has been focused on the top tier teams in the Western Conference. The Golden State Warriors, the Houston Rockets, who have been just red hot. The San Antonio Spurs, now that they have Kawhi Leonard, and whether or not the aggressive play of LMA is still going to take precedence to help the Spurs become one of those formidable top tier teams. But down along the mid lower seeds, there's a team out in the Northwest that has been kind of bubbling. They haven't quite surfaced yet to be considered a threat, but they definitely are a basketball team of much interest, and that's the Denver Nuggets. This is a team, as we're recording this show, who's 16-13, an above 500 team. But if you look at who they're up against in that Northwest division, I'm sure anyone and everyone probably would be saying that the Denver Nuggets would be essentially the worst team out of the Northwest. When you have teams like the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Utah Jazz, there is no question that a lot of people would have not expected that the Denver Nuggets would have a better record than the OK3 right now. And Shaw, to your point, the Denver Nuggets are among one of the more interesting teams that don't get talked about, whether it's because they don't have really any superstar talent emanating from out of that area. But more importantly, the way that these guys play basketball is about as balanced of a nuanced basketball team that you can talk of right now going on in the NBA.
I think that's a great place to start when you're talking about the Denver Nuggets in terms of how they move through the season without a superstar. And again, obviously, with all due respect to Nikola Jokic, who is going to be an all-star probably this year and is on everybody's radar as one of those up-and-coming talents in the NBA. But I think he's still developing in terms of that national stage and that national attention. And I think what Mike Malone has done as the head coach of this team here has been nothing short of a great job over especially the latter half of last year and then to begin this year. The main reason we're even talking about them is yeah, we expected them to be pretty good, middle of the pack, lower seed in the Western Conference, and they're exactly that. But I didn't expect that to be the case with the struggles of Jokic being out of lineup, with Paul Millsap only playing 16 or roughly half of their games to date as we record the show as well too. And the fact that they're still doing all these things and they're still right there and are very formidable. And the thing about it, as we alluded to, as you alluded to begin the big segment, is that it is because of balance. It's because Malone puts different guys out there, and the lack of consistency is actually working to their benefit, which isn't a typical thing in the NBA. That's very atypical. You usually want to have guys out there. They go out there, they know they're going to get their 25 minutes a night or whatever the case may be. Free could start, he could not play. Jamal Murray could be in the starting lineup. I mean, he started pretty much every game, but then he gets 25 minutes, and then Moutier will come in, and then Moutier may only get 6 minutes the next night. That type of juggling is unprecedented in terms of a team that actually going to have a winning record.
Yeah, and how it kind of, you can frame it any way that you want, Shaw. They're 11-2 at home, which you handle your business at home and you give yourself a really good opportunity to be in the thick of things when it comes April, May time frame down the stretch to get into the playoffs. This to me is a basketball team that understands that they can take advantage of where their arena sits, right? And the fact that they're in that high altitude and they want to play that up and down pace. They're a team that is reflective of a change that could take place in that Northwest division, where teams, even if, let's say, for example, the Denver Nuggets are not a viable basketball team to be in the playoff picture, that is the place where teams like the Portland Trailblazers, teams like the Oklahoma City Thunder, teams like the Minnesota Timberwolves, who may be trying to push themselves to get into that playoff picture, be seedings or whatever the case may be, fall into those trap games. And it's crazy because this team isn't playing like they believe that they should be considered a trap team. They're playing like a team that says, listen, the only thing you worry about is when we come to your arena, how we might perform. But you may not stand a chance if you come play on our yard. And that's how the Denver Nuggets have been taking the first quarter of this season with an impressive home record to start with, among the best in the NBA right now.
Yeah, they really are defending the home court and have that advantage, if you will, on a regular basis. And I think because of the high pace that they play at, they do score a lot of points. That's nothing has changed from a year ago. They're still right in the top 10, I think, in offensive rating 6. As we record this show. Defensively, still not quite where they want to be, but they do all the little things right. In a lot of ways, they are not terribly turnover prone. They rebound the basketball at a good rate, and they share the ball at a very good rate as well too. So I think for this roster with a lot of young guys and young pieces that are still just kind of mixing and matching, and then to think about this, let's throw this caveat in there. Remember, they actually traded away Donovan Mitchell to the Utah Jazz and got back Trey Lyles and some spare parts, if you will. So, imagine what this team could be like if they had to find minutes for Donovan Mitchell as well, too, in addition to guys like Will Barton and Gary Harris, who are also having great seasons.
So, and I want to kind of point to your point with regards to Donovan Mitchell. How, if you're the Denver Nuggets, I almost feel like you got by on something, right? Like, wasn't the idea of getting a Donovan Mitchell was a litmus, not so much a litmus test, but maybe a wake up call for Emmanuel Mudiay? Like, what happened where there's that confidence level to say we're gonna let a guy like Donovan Mitchell go? Which, listen, you can't play, armchair, NBA here on the talent when you're saying, hey, I can get a guy like a Trey Lyles, right, who could really help bolster our front court because you no longer have a Danilo Gallinari, and yeah, you may still have Miles Mason Plumlee, but the talent level that Trey Lyles brings to the table and his flexibility, his versatility, excuse me, really helps. If you're the Denver Nuggets, how do how do you make good on that? Because I'm sure a lot of people were probably thinking, so if you're getting a Donovan Mitchell, does that mean bye bye Mudiay? Right? And now Mudiay is one of those important cogs to why this is an actually deep, talented basketball team.
Well, I mean, I think you can take a look at that both ways. I think Moutier is a guy who they have tried to rid themselves of over the summer and maybe even going into off season as well too after the Mitchell trade. It just didn't work out. The value was too low. People, opposing GMs, wanted to see what he would able to do. Could he come back into camp and be an effective starter or backup? And it ends up he's the backup. I don't know if he's acquitted himself well enough to garner any interest from the other general manager. So I think they're probably going to play this out. But it does pose an interesting situation when, again, it's like, okay, you could have still had Mitchell here. Trey Lyles is starting to come on now the last maybe 5 to 7 games where he's getting a little bit more minutes and even has even started in certain points as well. But could you have gotten by without Trey Lyles? And then you have Donovan Mitchell. And then whether or not, what happens here, and, kind of talking circles here a little bit, but what happens is teams don't like to admit they made mistakes. And that's what it boils down to. If you keep Mitchell on this roster, and I don't know if Malone is that way, but I think from the front office standpoint, you keep Mitchell on this roster, he's there and he's balling, he's playing well. He's pushing guys like Mudiay and even Gary Harris. Mudiay probably now becomes your third string point guard where he's not getting any minutes. And then what value does he have at all, or what do you do with him at that point? So again, I'm not condoning the trade of Donovan Mitchell at all. Because again, I think they tried to get rid of Mudiay first. But nevertheless, they put him in a very precarious situation with drafting talent that's very, very similar and other guys that you need to develop. Because remember, we had Kelly Scaletta on our show, and he chose Gary Harris as his most improved player this coming season, right? And Harris has been pretty good. So you mean there was going to be a talent influx no matter what, and there's going to be a log jam no matter what they did.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our segment of the breakdown, as we discuss the Denver Nuggets, a team that is, on the come up. There's definitely talent there, but there's still some question marks, right, Shaw? So, look, there's no question that I think this basketball team wants to score the basketball. A little bit off the norm, when you think about a Mike Malone-led basketball team, because you would think that one of the staples is that this team will be an improved defensive team. Now, right now they're ranked 23rd, or while they're scoring roughly around 107 points per game, they're giving up about 107 points per game. Where do we find this balance with this basketball team? We're not gonna. There's no way that we're going to assume that they're going to be one of those teams that we talk about, like the Houston Rockets or like the Golden State Warriors. They don't have that offensive punch like that. They've got talented players on given nights that can score the basketball, I'm sure. But ultimately, I think it still comes down to, can that athleticism translate to stops? Can that mean that this is a basketball team that can find themselves improving to maybe being a top 15 type defensive basketball team, which then I think would help equate us measuring them a little bit more as a formidable team in the Western Conference?
I think it's a great point. If they can somehow find a way to be middle of the pack, they're not going to jump and be a top 10 team, top 8 or whatever the case would be. But if they can get to 16, 17, from 23. That's a big difference, I think, for them. And the main thing with what they're playing or what they're doing right now is that they got to figure out a way to at least be good situational defenders. You know what I mean? When the game is close, can you then at least turn it on for 4 or 5 minutes down in the last quarter there and get some stops that are necessary? And I think that's where they miss or will definitely need a guy like Paul Millsap. And hopefully he does come back, by the All-Star break, as some reports are saying. That's where he'll be able to help them, being a guy who can switch onto guards for limited times, if you will. Again, he's not going to sit there and guard point guards, but can help you in the pick and roll. Is smart. It's not going to commit too many silly fouls. And again, it's just a sneaky good defender overall. That's someone that he can help. And then there's guys who they have the athletic ability. And you just don't know if they're going to buy in that way. I mean, I look at a guy like Will Barton that has all the all the athletic ability in the world. But is he a stopper defensively? I mean, he's solid, but is he a stopper? I think he could be a guy who could really be a nuisance. And just because of just the way he moves, I think he could really get in the way and really be impactful on the defensive side of things. And then that's the other thing too, where maybe Mudiay, he should try to hang his hat on that side of the basketball, especially if he wants to try to earn some more minutes.
I want to talk about Will Barton, Shaw. I'm glad you brought up Will Barton's name. Will Barton is an interesting dude, man. First of all, the guy is all but like 26 years old. Yet you would think that the way his name gets thrown out there, and maybe let's say we took a plane and flew out to Denver, and we hang around the common folk out there in Nuggets land. And they be talking about Will Barton like a folk hero. You know what I'm saying? Like the man done, found gold in them dar hills, right? Will Barton is an interesting dude. The guy is only making $3.3 million, right? Yet this guy, year in and year out, averages at least double digits in scoring for this basketball team. And he's one of those type of players, Shaw, that we don't talk about when we talk sixth man. We may talk about him briefly. Like I know we did that last year when he came out like gangbusters. And the year before that, he came out like gangbusters. And we were saying, man, this could be that guy. He could be that other guy that we throw in the hat about sixth man of the year, like Jamal Crawford like type player. You know what I'm saying? Lanky, can score anyway, explosive, to your point, athleticism. And yet he doesn't get talked about in that kind of manner. He doesn't get elevated to a point where we should be talking about him that if he ever became an available free agent, money should be thrown his way. Why is that? Because listen, just the other night, man, he went ballistic against the Pelicans and helped them win a basketball game. And it's not like we haven't seen this from Will Barton before.
Now, he definitely has the ability to get hot and for long stretches and series of games, if you will, where he's kind of stringing it 20, 25, 30-point games together. He does have a lot of, again, and he's quirky, man. He's got this kind of herky-jerky movement, and he's got some good finishing ability. But it is a little strange that you don't hear about him that often in terms of some of the best guys out there. And I think those who, for the initiated, as I like to say, they kind of know that Will Barton has a lot of value around the league. But you don't hear his name other than, again, all right, this team might be trying to move him or his name has come up in trade talks or such and that. You do wonder now what happens in his contract situation. Will he get a large deal, or do they feel like they do need to move him? Because he's getting some plus minutes right now again this season, obviously with the injury to Millsap. But when Millsap does return, it'll take him a couple weeks to get back up to speed. But then does he go back into that bench role now? And then where he does become a little bit inconsistent and doesn't get as many touches, he needs the ball to be effective. And that's, as I just were alluding to a little while ago, is that if he's not really like a lockdown defender type of dude, then you're throwing him out there to get you hopefully 10 quick points in maybe 15 minutes, and then and then you bring him back off the bench, if you will. So for me, I like Will Barton a lot, but you do have to kind of what his overall value is around the league and to this even Denver Nuggets roster, should they decide to move on without him at some point.
Shaw, before we, kind of wrap things up, and I want to kind of get what you are expecting this basketball team to do moving forward now that we have legitimized the fact that this is a team that you should pay attention to. All right, let's not mistake the idea, and people who are listening to our show, let's not mistake this. We're not bringing up the Denver Nuggets simply because we couldn't figure out a team to discuss. We bring up the Denver Nuggets because it's been a while now where we felt like you either want to sing a swan song for the Denver Nuggets, or we are wanting to shoot, to sing a break of dawn song for them. Like, it's about time that these guys start to rise up and start really showing themselves out, and no longer play sick and fiddle, especially now in that Northwest Division. I don't think that the Denver Nuggets clearly want to be that team where they're giving away their talented players to other basketball organizations that want to go out and succeed, and they're just kind of running through the motions. So clearly, they've got a nice blend of talent. Think that they've got a solid coach there. But the one thing that I think that stands out about this basketball team, Shaw, is when you look at this front court, they have got so much money vested in their front court players. Paul Millsap, Mason Plumlee, Kenneth Faried. At some point, Malone needs to really figure out what to do with these guys. Because if you're going to be the Denver Nuggets, and let's say you're in the mix to possibly make a run to be in this playoff picture, you can't do what you did last year in giving up one of your basketball players, right, to another basketball team who is in your same division, whether it's because of money situation, whatever the case may be. You don't want to be that team that gives away more talented players that you have on your end for marginal players that have large contracts. And when you look at this front court, they've got marginal basketball players with large contracts, and they're going to have to figure out something if they want to try and make moves come the trade deadline, if they're going to be serious about competing to be a part of this Western Conference playoff picture.
I think what's hard for them is just figuring out exactly what they want to add. You can argue to some degree, because I think they were in the conversations for the Eric Bledsoe sweepstakes, if you will. Do they want to shore up that point guard position? They may not be totally sold, even on Jamal Murray. I think they like him. They might like him a little bit better off the ball as opposed to on it. They don't have a great ball distributor on the team. If you look at this roster, that's probably what they're lacking the most. Otherwise, they're okay. They're decent rebounding. You just mentioned the front court where they have a lot of money tied up into it. Jokic is under contract. Obviously, he's under contract for another year with the team option, and get that extension going, and all that'll be fine, and they'll work itself out. But yeah, they don't seem to have a lot of ball distribution. They shoot the three ball pretty well. And then again, because of the type of players they have, they are in the system that Malone is even running. They have a lot of guys that can plug and play, and that's what he's been doing. With the Wilson Chandlers and the Trey Lyles and the Farieds of the world and everything like that too. But you do wonder with some of those assets, again, what is the value on the open market for any of them? Chandler, I think Chandler has a team option. No, sorry, Chandler has a player option. But a guy like Barton could walk in free agency. So do they need to make a move now and try to figure it out? And then, I guess my question to you, even going back on you a little bit here, is where do you think they could most improve? What area should they try to liquidate some of these assets that they may have if they were to do any of those things at all?
Well, I definitely think that listen, I've said for a long time that they needed to have moved Kenneth Faried. I think Faried needs a change of pace, and more importantly, I just think the Denver Nuggets need a change of pace in the way that they have issued the kind of contracts that they've given to some of their front court players, and definitely from the wing position. I think that listen, while I think Paul Millsap is a quality player, he is your traditional four-man. There's not a ton of versatility on his end, and he's been getting by playing at that power forward position with the three-man position body. At some point, you need to offset that with a legitimate swingman. Now, maybe they were swinging for that when they got a guy like Trey Lyles that could, help provide some flexibility there, at times when Malone may want to put a lineup together where you could put Lyles and Millsap out there and push Millsap to the three so he could take advantage of some of these guys at that position. But there's nothing been definitive. You can't rely on Wilson Chandler. He's never healthy enough. And he's never been good enough where he should have always been a solid starter for a basketball team. So there lies the conundrum. If it's not even just the minutes, it's the personnel that you have. There has to be a better commitment, not just by the way that you give the contracts, but the type of personnel that you put out there that are going to play that 3-4 position. And I think that's where you start. Even if you're not going to sell yourself on the idea that you want Jokic to be a legitimate 5, which he is, but he wanted to play the 4, that means that your 3 and 4 positions need to be more versatile than what you were normally doing with a guy like Mason Plumlee, who plays the 4-5 position with some level of versatility, but just doesn't play either position particularly that well.
Oh, that's tough. That's tough on Plumlee. But you're right, though. They probably could use some legitimate help at the wing. After losing
Well, I'm just
Gallinari.
saying that Plumlee hasn't grown. Like, how many more places is he going to go to before you really figure out what he's actually going to give you? He rebounds slightly well, but he doesn't rebound. He doesn't dominate as a rebounder. He scores particularly good, but he doesn't dominate as a scorer. And to me, under Mike Malone, you would think that Plumlee could easily give himself an opportunity to be a legitimate big in this league because they're not giving him he's not playing with a ton of superstar talent around him that would compromise his ability to get the ball and make plays down there when they need it the most, which is one of the things that the Denver Nuggets do suffer from. If Jokic isn't on that basketball court, they can't score from the front court.
Well, Plumlee's a good rebounder, and I mean decent rebounder. He's a good passer. I think he's a very good passer. He can handle the ball pretty well for his size. But you're right. In today's game, he doesn't space the floor enough. He's an activity guy, much like Fareed, but different at the same time. So
Yeah.
they do have some things that that's how they need to figure out to play, and that's why it's good, I think, in their case that they do have a versatile big man in Jokic who can stretch it a little bit. He's not a knockdown 3-point shooter by any stretch of the imagination, but he can go out there and hit the shot, if you will. He's shooting actually pretty well, 40%. But I think they run a lot of offense through him, obviously, and his passing is something that's good. So that's where they get a lot of their offense from, is initiated, is actually out of that front court. Especially with the ball running through Jokic. But you do wonder, do they try to make some sort of move to shore up something? Do they figure out, is this the year they finally move Wilson Chandler? Again, he has a player option. He's probably going to opt into that, especially as off injured as he has been. So you're right. They do have some holes that they need to fill. But, this is kind of turned into more doom and gloom than it probably should have been, because it's still a team, like as we said, they're there. They're more than above.
Yeah, they're not a doom and gloom team, Sean. Listen, we've seen far worse situations on other basketball teams, and we don't even dig into the money factor with them. This is a solid basketball team, and if the rest of the other teams in the Western Conference are going to struggle, like the OK3 and the Portland Trailblazers, and you know what I'm saying, the New Orleans Pelicans, right? Which the Pelicans, the Trailblazers, they have far more talented players on their roster than the Denver Nuggets. And yet the Denver Nuggets, we're talking about them. I think that, to me, what I'm saying is that what I don't want to see from this team is that they are short-sighted in the belief that what they've got is a good core group of players that can actually help. And then they make a trade or they pull some kind of move that makes you question it, because it just doesn't seem like they believe that they're doing that, what they've got is enough. And they didn't do anything necessarily to supplement that. It's just to marginalize it. You know what I mean?
Like I said, you do have a good point. They have $111 million committed in salary next year, and that's with Chandler and Darrell Arthur, $7.4 million player option. So it's a little hefty even for him. Those two guys, with those options that will likely be taken, then you still have to figure out, okay, well, Will Barton is not going to come back for 3.5. You know what I mean? So you're going to be well over the cap. And then if he does,
maybe 3.7. How about 3.6?
Not a chance. So if they lose a guy like him,
3.5 can get you a long way. It got me a long way in high school, bro.
Well, I mean, GPAs and millions, completely different things. But
I wasn't talking about my GPA though.
Oh well, I'm gonna let that ride.
Okay.
But I mean, then they'll need a guy like Juan Hernangomez maybe to develop, and I think he's definitely has some tools and some talent. But I'm not sure what his position is either. He's, again, that 3-4-ish type of guy. Is he a legit three? Is he fast enough to stay with threes on a regular basis? I'm not convinced about that. But it's something that they're going to really have to figure out. And then, not to mention, the year after that, well, though their salary will decrease dramatically, but Jokic's contract will be up, so they'll definitely need to pony up again. But next year, it looks like they're going to pretty much be the exact same team, unless some major trades happen. From, is that Tim McConnell? I think that's in their front office. So I'll be watching, man, because I think the Denver Nuggets are a good product. They're not an elite team, and I think they know that. But what do they do to get better? And I think getting a guy like Millsap this offseason was a step in the right direction, as they've definitely thrown their name in the hat for some of these big name guys out there. And Woj reports over the summer continue to say, watch Denver, because they're trying to get meetings, they're trying to get on the board. So I think that's a trend that will continue over the coming years, despite the lofty salary that's already committed to them next year.
Well, the Denver Nuggets are very much an eclectic group of guys who seem to gel really well and are defying the odds right now in a very heavily contested Western Conference. Can they keep up the pace of what they've been doing so far this season, all the way through to the finish line and be one of the surprise teams to possibly make the playoffs, only one can tell. But one thing is for certain, that these names, the Will Bartons, the Jokic's, the Jamal Murray's of the world, have a prime opportunity to make a name for themselves in this real crazy Western Conference right now. And just the fact that they're in the throes of this type of conversation speaks volumes to the job that Mike Malone has done with this Nuggets team so far this season. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. This week on The Drop, we will take the good from the bad and the ugly. I know that Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef will be flipping over their graves right now. They probably would be flipping over their graves if we talked about the players that are playing on these really, really bad basketball teams. But nonetheless, Shaw, I find this to be a very interesting topic on your part. Before we even get into it, what in God's name had you thinking about this? Don't tell me it was because the boat was rocking and, you know what I'm saying, you were considering your last rites or whatever. So I wanted to make sure that I pay homage to some really good basketball players that may never get to see the light of day if they're going to continue to be on a bad basketball team.
Well, it's not that. I mean, I feel like, I always say on our show is that we're kind of an underdog podcast. Nobody really saw us coming. We're doing our thing a little bit as well too. And sometimes you get lost. You know what I mean? Sometimes you get lost in the sea of things going on out there, and no pun intended on that one. But definitely, when it comes to it, I was just taking a look at some games or some highlights and box scores, really, and I was like, wow, hey, this guy here, the one guy that sparked kind of the conversation was Harrison Barnes. And listen, I think there was a lot of question about HB coming out of North Carolina, then going to Golden State, and then saying, okay, well, yeah, they're going to let him go because KD's coming, but is he really going to be okay in Dallas, or is he just going to be, kind of like a role player? Was that really what his role was, or his ceiling was supposed to be in Golden State? A guy 12 points a game, 5 rebounds, et cetera, et cetera. And I think he's proven some of those people wrong that doubted him, and then especially since he was so highly touted when he got into college, and the bar kind of went down on it, especially when he got to the NBA. So a guy like Harrison Barnes stands out for me as a guy who's a really good basketball player and who's not getting a whole lot of a shine because the Dallas Mavericks are struggling just so much. So for me, that's kind of where it all stems from.
DeAndre Jordan. Listen, the Los Angeles.
And so, let me jump back into that real quick because I think
I didn't even know you jumped in to begin with. Hold on, my bad.
No, I think it's hard, even with the topic because like what are the qualifiers? Now the Clippers are bad now. Right? Like the Grizzlies are bad now. So it's hard to say, DeAndre Jordan or Marc Gasol or Mike Conley, at least for me, because those teams are now recently bad. You know what I mean? And then you could say the Mavericks have been pretty bad for a little while now. But, Barnes has acquitted himself well. Jordan was on a good team for the better part of his career and has been a good player. So for me, that's why I didn't really look at those types of guys, especially in a situation like LA and Memphis, where those are teams that were good and now they're struggling this season. And whatever the situations are that are surrounding those things, it made it a little bit harder for me to point them out. So that's just my thing.
Okay, so in other words, Cal, wrong answer. So that's what that
no
was.
Wrong answer. It's all what you feel. It is all what you feel. I mean, I think DeAndre is going to continue to have a more than productive year, and then he may get traded out of that situation. All
right. Let me throw a side caveat to your point, Shaw. I think of bad basketball teams. I don't just think about now. I think about what the outlook is reflective for this team. And how many times have we been talking about how that Lob City trifecta, Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan needed to have been broken up. The problem is that how this team got broken up actually reflects this being a bad basketball team and is going to be a bad basketball team. Because it shouldn't have been Blake Griffin. It shouldn't have been Chris Paul that got moved. Okay? It should have been Blake Griffin. Chris Paul and DeAndre Jordan wasn't the issue, right? And so when I look at DeAndre Jordan, whenever he's been put on a team by himself and he is the focal point, kind of like the anchor, the leader, he stands out, right? When Blake Griffin went down, when Chris Paul went down, DeAndre Jordan steps up, and maybe the numbers just seem so inflated, but I'd like to think that he is a solid basketball player. Now you are fully watching. This team, they've had Austin Rivers, they had Wesley Johnson, they've got all of these they've got Danilo Gallinari, they've got all of these players, man. And the one player who I always feel like still stands out more than anything, like you can honestly say, if DeAndre Jordan doesn't get swept under the rug, he's going to produce for you. And this is why I look at it and say that Los Angeles Clippers are a bad basketball team, because they're underappreciating the value of what a DeAndre Jordan has been given that basketball team for the last few years. And now it's even egregiously more highlighted when you look at this roster, and you can clearly see that DeAndre Jordan is basically the best basketball player on that team, right? There are other guys that can score the basketball, but they can't put the ball in the basket. They can't stop no one, can't defend no one, and at least you get that with DeAndre Jordan.
I mean, DJ again is one of those guys who's again, we all know the banana boat scandal or whatever the hell it was, the airplanes and the tweets and all that stuff when he almost went to Dallas, and then he decided to come back to LA. You do wonder what happens with him in the future. And again, at this point, we had Clipper Darrell on a couple of weeks ago, right? And he had some love for DeAndre, but there's still a lot of things DeAndre cannot do and has failed to learn how to do offensively, which kind of prohibits me from saying, okay, he's a great talent. He's a very good talent. But should he have been an all-star? Yeah. Should he have made defensive teams and all those other things like that? All that stuff is true. But for me, is like, can you build around him, whatever the case may be? And again, with some of these guys that we're going to be discussing, I don't think you want to build around Harrison Barnes. I just think he's a good player on a bad team. So for me, DeAndre is definitely fits the mold this season because of the steps back the Clippers have taken. And I really looked at a lot of teams that they had to be at least 5 games under 500. If you're 2 or 3 games under 500, you're kind of right there. 5 games or below, or you're probably not as close. So the next guy, I think, probably the captain of the good on the bad and the ugly is probably Devin Booker from Phoenix Suns. And I know he's hurt right now, but he's probably the best talent on the bad teams that we'll discuss overall. So I think we've talked about Booker on our show previously, but a guy who can put up 70 points in the game like he did last year against the Boston Celtics, really a much better pick and roll ball handler than you would have expected him to be, just a better ball distributor. A lot of the conversation with Devin Booker stems around him early on was his comparison to Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson is still a better overall shooter and a better overall defender. But Booker is better off the bounce, better at driving to the lane and finishing as well too. So I think for me, Devin Booker is probably the captain of this team if I were going to make such a thing happen.
When the Phoenix Suns have to span the gamut of the NBA and rest their hopes on Isaiah Canaan to lead them to the promised land. And no disrespect to Isaiah Canaan, because I've always believed that Isaiah Canaan is a decent basketball player. I think maybe he's been a little too overhyped, but he's always been a decent basketball player. He's one of those guys that I think unfairly gets judged for chucking the shots. You know what I'm saying? Like we were chastising Dion Waiters, but not nearly as bad as we chastise Isaiah Canaan. Like, what is Isaiah Canaan? What right does he have to be chucking up shots like this? Like, come on, man. Like, that's how this basketball, right? But when the Phoenix Suns have to rely on Isaiah Canaan to basically be their best offensive player, literally, in games, that you would pray for a Devin Booker, I can't really argue with you there, Shaw. I can't really.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, seriously. What about Nikola Vucevic?
Yeah, I think that's a
how about he is what we might call the exception to the rules of great, because he's not a great player, Shaw, but he could be great, right? Like there could be a level of greatness to him if the organization and the personnel around him, I don't want to say put him in a better position, but certainly would have helped him be in a better position, which they haven't been. They made this big deal of getting him from the Philadelphia 76ers, and he's been marginalized every single year. So, and even though they got they've got Aaron Gordon, I still think that Vucevic ultimately was their go-to player. So, there you go.
I got no problem with that. I think I would only disagree with the fact that he's been marginalized. He was our feature guy for a few seasons there. Then Vogel came last year, and we just talked about this, a couple of weeks ago as well too, where they brought Biombo in and they thought Biombo could challenge Vucevic for starters minutes and all that. So that made Vuce have a bad season last year. And again, he still averaged a double-double, 14 and 10 in 75 games. So he just had a down year. His scoring was down, but he's back up this year and banging threes right now. Definitely has shot his way into that stretch five conversation, shooting 4 threes a game at 35%. For me, Vucevic definitely fits the mold here as a very good player on a bad team. And again, not necessarily somebody you're going to build around, but when people were throwing his name out last year in terms of the trade and the Magic might move him because they have Biombo and all these bigs and all these people that they wanted to play, I was like, yo, sign me up. If it's going to cost me a late first round draft pick or a couple of second round picks and a player, or whatever the case be, to get Vucevic on the roster. Yeah, I know he's not a defensive stalwart, but he still gets his blocking game with his steal per game and everything like that too. I was all in on it, and fortunately for Orlando, they did not make that move. They did not find takers on him, and they've kept him, and now he's playing great basketball again alongside Eric Gordon in Orlando.
You tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our segment of the drop, we're talking about good players, great players, on the bad and ugly teams. You know who I want to pay some homage to, Shaw?
Lay it on me.
How about Zach Randolph? How about the OG, man? How about Z-Bo, right? I mean, just when we're saying that this guy's probably being, he's, you know what they do? They don't kill off the machine. They just kind of retire him out to scrap, right? So so he goes out to Sacramento, so he can, you know what I'm saying? So he can, kind of have his Florida retirement days. And here he is, being one of the main reasons why the Sacramento Kings even have 8 wins on their, in the NBA season, man. Like that dude, I just feel like he deserves to be on a basketball team that's going to give him a chance to be playing for an NBA championship.
He chose his life, though.
I know he chose it, man. But if you are Sacramento, man, you need to throw homie a bone, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like, yo, man, I know you trying to I know you're trying to be charitable, man, but this is too charitable, man. We're gonna ship you now. You know what I'm saying? Like, send him somewhere where his talents will not go to waste.
At 36, and they offered him what was it? $24 million or for 2 years. I mean, he had to take that, right? Like that was he could not refuse. So he went there, and everyone.
But couldn't he do it with like a wink and a smile, like because like you know what I'm saying? Like, listen, just give me half now, and then just send me later. You know what I'm saying? Like,
could be. I mean, and you never know. But I think Sacramento is clearly in a situation where, and we've talked about this at length as well too, where they have multiple veteran guys on this roster. And I think of those veteran guys, the one that does not fit the most is probably George Hill at this way, especially at the salary that they decided to pay him, right? So what is it, 3 years, $60 million or something like that? So I mean, why do they do that? That's a bigger question for me. But Z-Bo coming in there now, he at the end of the day, he's playing decent basketball.
Shaw, your question points to the ugly part, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's horrendous. Especially when you have De'Aaron Fox. So, but anyway, my point is, you bring Z-Bo there, and then obviously he's going to be now taking touches and time away from guys you need to develop in your Scala BCRs and your Willie Cauley-Steins. That hurts them from that standpoint. But from a maturity standpoint, in terms of being a professional, despite the fact that he was caught, I guess, selling weed in the offseason, he's supposed to be that big brother in the locker room to some of these young guys. So, but again, do you need him? Do you need George Hill? Do you need Vince Carter? They're all three of those guys there to bring this roster up when you're trying to develop guys as well too. So I do think you're going to see a lot of rest days for Z-Bo coming forward as some of these young guys try to develop, and he'll be happy to sit back, collect his check, go out there and play good minutes when he's called upon. But I think that's a good selection. Z-Bo definitely a good player. Obviously at the end of his prime on a bad team.
All right, Shaw. Who else do you think is deserving to be of that? Send us off really well with another good player. That's on the good. Send us off with a good player that is truly on a bad and ugly team.
All right. Well, I think right now the Charlotte Hornets are playing really ugly basketball. I'm flabbergasted at how they've struggled. Started off decently, and then they've just kind of hit the tank, if you will. And now we got all kinds of issues with their coaching as well too. But I think Kemba Walker, as a guy who, I think he made his first All-Star last year, and definitely somebody who is always should be in the conversation of that. Kemba is to me definitely the quintessential good player on a bad team, especially in the case of the Charlotte Hornets right now. I want to throw out a guy that not many people are going to say this is like my 11th guy on the roster. You know what I mean? And this is kind of like how you like to throw out like those wild names every now and then. We come out with Isaiah Whitehead, and I'm going to stick to Brooklyn. It's going to be my guy Spencer Dinwiddie, man. And I think he's playing great basketball with D'Angelo Russell out and Jeremy Lin out. I don't know that he's a good player, but he's a very effective player, and he's a good dude. And will he start on 20 other teams in the NBA? Probably not. But nevertheless, he's doing it and doing it big, I think, for the Brooklyn Nets. So shout out to him. Definitely a nice player, a nice guy who on any other roster would be a rotation player, and I think could fit in. Because I didn't expect him to play this well out of Brooklyn this year.
Well, I will agree with you on that part that, he is, first of all, Spencer Dinwiddie sounds like somebody that should be writing for the Daily Bugle. So if nothing else, if he does not make this a successful NBA career, he definitely has a life after just with his name alone. But, you could probably point to a couple of players. Rondé Hollis Jefferson, I think, is starting to come along as somebody. He's supposed to be the focal point in the team that they're building around the Brooklyn Nets, but him definitely, Shaw. So a lot of interesting names that have been thrown out there for us to kind of figure out like where they all fit in the grand scheme of things being on very bad and ugly basketball teams. And it'll be very interesting to see if they can continue to trend being this good for however long that they remain on that team. Or because to your point, Shaw, a couple of things usually happens. They either help turn things around for that basketball team. They help change the mindset of the organization and the direction that they need to go to move forward so that their respective teams can be successful. Or they definitely have just upped the ante about their value and their worth come trade deadline or possibly for the offseason. And with some of these guys that we talk about, clearly they are raising their stock. I would love to see some of these players like the Kemba Walkers, the DeAndre Jordans, and the Nikola Vucevic. I want to see them playing on other basketball teams where I think things can change very quickly for them and how we perceive them and what their contributions can be, not to just the basketball teams, but to their careers respectively. Because I don't like to see these guys being marginalized because they're staying for the money or they're staying because of pride. At some point, let's start talking about doing what's necessary to win championships. We see the superstars do it. Why not these guys as well too?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think you look at a guy like DeMarcus Cousins, and now he's having still middling success. His team is at 500 as we record, right? But somebody that you definitely wanted to see finally get into the playoffs. So to see a guy like Cousins move into a more positive situation is great, and I think we want to see that, especially in the case of a guy like Devin Booker, who seems to be an NBA favorite kind of across the league, if you will. Z-Bo has obviously had some success in Memphis already. Harrison Barnes, was in a different situation in Golden State, ultimate level of success there. And now, can he be the focal point of success in Dallas? And that remains to be seen. I think that's really where you have to ask yourself the question on some of these guys. They're good, but are they building blocks for their rosters? A guy like same thing like Vucevic, is he the building block? I think they're more worried about Aaron Gordon developing than they are Vucevic at this point. So that's where it becomes, again, something that you really do have to kind of dig deeper into and analyze with some of these guys. But I think in the case of Kemba and Devin Booker, those are guys that are probably going to be on their rosters for a very long time, and those teams are going to ride out no matter what happens with those two players.
All right, well, there you have it, man. The good on definitely the bad and the ugly. Guys that we definitely feel like are great players, don't get enough shine, don't get enough love because they're surrounded by the black swans in the NBA as we speak. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
Coast to coast.
Time now to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. Rudy Gobert, Utah Jazz will be missing him for at least 2 weeks. his knee injury against that Boston Celtics game over this weekend, Shaw. Heartbreak, man. The Utah Jazz trying to find their footing right now in a very tough Northwest Division.
Yeah, with Gobert going in and out of the lineup this year, that's hard for them to kind of overcome. He's the staple of their defense. Favors now gets an opportunity to go back on the run that he was doing when Gobert was out the first time. They just got Hood back. They just got Joe Johnson back. So you want to see this team fully healthy to see what they can actually do in the Northwest.
All right, out in Miami, James Johnson. He'll be missed for 7 to 10 days. Listen, man, this guy's been a glue for that basketball team, and you're starting to see the Miami Heat start to turn things around and become that team that we expected them to be for this upcoming season.
Yeah, when I think about a glue guy, I think you said it best. I think about a guy like James Johnson, for real. Mr. kind of a Swiss knife, does everything, especially for that team. Is now a captain on that roster as well, too. So they'll miss him for the next couple of games. Hopefully it's not longer than the 7 to 10 days that was initially prognosticated.
All right. Out in Los Angeles, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, really one of the surprise players. Surprising because he signed to play for the Lakers, but he certainly has been yielding dividends to make the Los Angeles Lakers a really good basketball, good basketball team, a competitive basketball team. He is going to be restricted for the next 25 days. A big loss for them, even though their depth in the shooting guard is pretty stout, having Clarkson follow right up behind Kentavious Caldwell-Pope.
Well, they're lucky, whatever is going on with that legal situation, it has him restricted to LA for the next month or so. I think he only ends up missing maybe 2, maybe 3 games. They play a lot of the bulk of their games actually at home. So it works out for him in terms of a timing standpoint. But like I said, man, you just got to be more careful. Don't get caught up in these situations. KCP, on the 1-year deal in LA, hopefully this is just a bump in the road that he can get past that, get past this moving forward as the season progresses.
All right. And finally, Shaw. Listen, it's about that time, right? Los Angeles has some really, really good news outside of Lonzo Ball hype and Lonzo Ball watch. Kobe watch. Kobe's jersey is going to be retired this week. The Mamba, finally his jersey being raised up the rafters. Man, and it's only been not even a year since this dude has walked away from the game.
It's like 4 months.
Oh my God. I mean, what? Next month we're going to be talking about him being in the Hall of Fame already? I mean, I don't understand this. It's like...
the accelerated time frame, man. But the fact, like I said, I poke fun at this a little bit because I'm not making fun of Kobe Bryant as the man, the myth, the legend, the Hall of Famer that he is. But the fact that they're retiring both his numbers, a little absurd to me. That's fine. You want to do that, it's cool. Unprecedented, I think, in NBA history to do that. But 8 and 24 both going up the Raptors for LA. I'm like, just pick one. But whatever. Shout out to Kobe, the Mamba. He deserves it. If anybody is going to get this done, I guess, especially in LA, he'd be the one to get it happen for him.
There was an interesting discussion being had that NBA TV is going to be introducing, players only, Isaiah Magic. Yeah, and so the big question is who are your top 5 Lakers? You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, really, Isaiah? Really, NBA TV? Seriously, we gonna do this to Magic, man? Like, it's bad enough he's got to swallow the pill. The Los Angeles Dodgers lost Game 7 in the World Series. The Los Angeles Lakers, you know what I'm saying, playing like trash. You know what I'm saying? Lonzo is always at the breadth of conversation. His father yakety-yakking, and now all of a sudden Isaiah got to ask him, where does he put Kobe? Is he a top 5 player? Yeah, it's just like too much for the man. Like, you know what I'm saying? Trying to kill the man off. The man is young, man, running things. Let him enjoy his life.
Well, I'm gonna die if he puts Lonzo Ball in that category, because Magic is always good for those hot takes. So I'll be watching that eagerly to kind of see what happens, man. But yeah, I think
he gets away with it because of his smile, man. That's what it is. That, and he owns 3/4 of Los Angeles.
Well, real talk. That is a businessman supreme right there, man. Shout out to Magic Johnson for all he's accomplished, especially in the LA area, and worldwide. Magic he's definitely done major things, to help his people. So again, but I'll be looking forward to seeing that thing with Isaiah, man. I think that players only stuff, it's good. And while that one specifically might be a little sappy, in Isaiah and Magic, I wasn't really into their whole friendship or whatever it was back then, but it's still history, and that's for that reason I'm definitely going to do it.
Yeah, it's a must-see for a lot of people who remember that era of NBA basketball. I certainly do. I'm really interested to find out. Listen, and as much as bad rap, and it's solely on Isaiah Thomas. As much of a bad rap as he's had, he really has been one of the true phenomenal players of our lifetime. Isaiah Thomas was, you know, a trailblazer. And he was in the throes of a lot of those rivalry basketball games that I know that we love to relish and cherish now more so than ever, man. We live to maybe see some kind of, you know, heated rivalry between two basketball teams in the way that the Pistons and the Lakers were at each other, the Pistons and the Celtics were at each other, the Lakers and the Celtics were at each other, the Pistons and the Knicks. You know what I'm saying? Like there was just a true intense competitive nature from this. And to see that there's still guys that are of that era that are living, breathing, and talking about it, and they're talking about it from the heart. I just encourage people who are fans of the NBA, new, old, modern, soul, to you know what I'm saying, go into it, listen to it, and just take in what these guys have to say. You never know. There may not be many more opportunities. These guys will be able to share that kind of perspective about where the NBA was at that time when they were playing.
100%. You know, I think as a fan of the game, you should love the history of the game as well too. You know, I think all the great players, you hear them talk about those who said it before them. So even as a fan, you have a duty to listen in when these types of things take place, and go back and, you know, watch YouTube videos. Even that stuff is some available now too for the, you know, those with the attention deficit disorders. If you don't have an hour to kill, you can watch 4 or 5 minute clips, you know, interviews, and even highlights some of these guys, man, because, you know, the history of the game is definitely where it's at, man, and you know, we love all that stuff. So as always, we'll be tuning into that and everything else that the NBA and players only produces, man, because again, that's where it really is at, and that's where you learn that history and see how they saw the game back when it was a little bit more rougher and a little bit more rugged.
Definitely, brother. Definitely. Awesome show this week, man. A nice way for you to kind of roll in with the tide a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Come in with the hotness. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, like, you know what I'm saying? Hey, man, every now and again, man. But great show altogether, man. You know, a lot of good stuff going on. And, you know, listen, man, our next show is we're gonna be covering, you know, the Christmas Day games, man. So I know we're gonna be looking forward to that. And hopefully any other you know, startling and crazy news is happening out in the association as we speak. So good stuff all around, brother.
Absolutely. Can't wait, you know, to jump into these Christmas Day games as well too. But as always, man, you know, it's a pleasure to be back doing the show as we do it. Hopefully our fans and listeners are consuming it and loving it. Make sure you give us that rating on iTunes if you haven't done so already. But shout out to Almighty, shout out to 16 Inch Ring, and all the other networks and platforms that we're associated with, man. You know, happy holidays as well too. But we'll be talking about Christmas games just a couple days, bro.
Most definitely. So for the baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.